We're going to talk about files and folders today in VBA. We are specifically going to talk about the scripting library of Microsoft VBA. This library provides a lot of functionalities. We will focus primarily on the file system object that allows us to manipulate files and folders. Do things with them, open the files. You can do all sorts of stuff with them. And we'll look at how the code works and by going through a specific example. So this application renames all the files in a specified folder. So the user gets to choose a folder, and the user also is given one of 5 options. The user can choose to replace all the underscores with spaces in the file names, replaces all the spaces with underscores, deletes all spaces and underscores, or inserts spaces or underscores before each uppercase character. So this one is a little tricky, other than the first character and any character in the file extension. So let's take a look at this example. I'll give a demo of what this program works, and then we'll go through the code together. Okay, so if I push this button, I'll actually be running the code, and we'll see sort of the sequence of effects, and then we'll go to the Visual Basic and look at the code. Okay, so this is just a message box saying in the next dialog box, select the folder where files to be renamed are stored. So I'll have to select a folder where I want to rename the files. So click OK, and this is called a FileDialog. We have seen this before in the previous lecture. So this is the browse dialog that allows the user to specify a folder. So I'm going to specify the C documents folder or the user documents folder, this one. Okay, and then I'm going to select one of the following options. I'm going to change all the underscores to spaces, change all the spaces to underscores, delete spaces and underscores, insert spaces before uppercase characters, or insert underscores before uppercase characters. So I can use any of these. So let me just choose maybe the third one, and then I'll click OK. And 3 files were renamed successfully. So I can actually go to the documents folder and take a look. Okay, so these files probably had, some of them had underscores or spaces, and now they're all gone. So let's try another one. So if I try to say I want to choose the documents folder, and then I want to insert spaces before uppercase characters. No files were renamed because I don't really, none of those actually uppercase characters. I do have some, so I'm not sure why it's complaining about that, but I can probably add some spaces here so we can see if it works. Right, so let me add these 2 spaces and then go back. And now I'm going to say I want to go to documents, and I want to change spaces to underscores. 2 files were renamed successfully, and that's these 2 files that I just changed. So that worked fine. So let's take a look at how this is implemented using the scripting library, the FileSystemObject. Within this FileSystemObject class, we're going to see how we use the folder object and the file object. Okay. So this program has a module and also has a form. So the form is where these option buttons were implemented. You can look at the code. It's pretty straightforward. So we have some initialization, initialize, we show, and then we have sort of a select case where we just kind of capture which one is being selected. Okay. So the main code is in this module, and I have documented the code pretty significantly, so you should download the code and read through the details. So here, to do this, we are going to use the scripting file system object in order to provide the functionalities that I show you. In order to do this, you will first refer to the scripting library. So you need to do this only once. Once you've turned this on, you don't have to worry about it in the future, but you have to do this at least once. So what you need to do is go to the select tools. You have to go to tools, not select. I'm sorry. So go to tools. Tools is right here, and we'll go to references. And then we'll have to scroll down, although it's not a long list, it's right here, Microsoft Scripting Runtime. Okay, I have to check this box, which is already checked for me. But if yours is unchecked, all you have to do is check this and click OK. And then you should be able to access the scripting library, which is what you need to access the file system object. Okay. So what we will do is, this is the sub, rename files that gets run when the button is clicked. There are two ways to create an instance of the file system object class. We are going to dim this, right, as a new instance of the object variable. Okay, so this is method 1 and this is method 2. So method 2 is commented out because we only need to do this once. So method 1 is only one line of code. You would dim FSO, so file system object, as a new scripting.filesystemObject, as a new instance of this object. Okay, and we can also dim it as a new scripting file system object, and then we set this object to create this object. So you could do it this way or this way. So this is easier and simpler, so we'll just go with this. And then once you have this file system object, then you can dim an instance of the scripting folder. So we'll need a folder object. We also need a file object. So this is scripting.file is a file object. Because we'll be manipulating files and folders, we'll need to create these objects so we can use them later. We also need a file dialog. So file dialog is something we already looked at the last lecture. It's a dialog box that allows the user to select files or folders. So this is something you all you have to do is create this instance of the file dialog object, and then you can use it. So this is where the user gets to specify where the folder has to be, the location. Okay. So we'll look at that later. And then these are a bunch of integers and a bunch of string variables that we need to declare. Okay. So now we're ready for the file dialog. So the file dialog, we're going to use the file dialog, the folder picker option, because we're going to ask the user to specify a folder location. So we'll need to use this option. And remember, we have to write application.fileDialog and using this constant. And we can set our FD, our file dialog object. Okay, so we have a file dialog object over here that we declared, and we can just use it over here. Okay, and then remember, we have to check if the file dialog is actually working, the user did not hit cancel. Then we can use the file dialog to figure out what folder, right? So the selected items, which again, we look at the last lecture. So if you need a review, make sure you go back and watch the previous video. So this is whatever the user has selected. That folder will be stored into search folder as a string, which is the location of the folder. And then once we have that, then we can use the string later on to process. So we're using this variable comes from here. So we get the user to choose a rename option on the user form. The user gets 5 options. So the basically what we do is we call the form options, FRM options is this user form over here. I'm going to call this show options dialog function. This function is a public function of that user. We're going to call it and get the rename option. So it's right here. This is the form options form, and we can go to the code view to see the code. So this is the function that we're calling show options dialog. This is a Boolean. It returns true or false whether the dialog has been canceled or not. Okay. So once that has been called successfully over here, so this is called, and if this is called successfully, so this is checking if it's checking a true false Boolean decision. So once that has been shown successfully, then we're going to go ahead and set this folder. So this is a folder object. Okay, so it's an instance, SRCH is an instance of the scripting folder object. We're going to set it to this file system object. We're going to use the get folder method. Okay, this is a method to get this particular folder. So the search folder, remember, is a variable that stores the user selection from here. So once we get the folder, we need to get it into, so we go use this object and go get the folder using this string. And then we're going to put this folder, set this folder to be this search folder object. Okay, so once we have this object, the object has a bunch of properties and methods that we can use. One of the most important things is that a folder has a bunch of files. So once I have this object, the object has a property called .files. This .files property stores all the files within that folder. And then we can just use the for loop to iterate through each of the files in this folder. Okay, so for each file in this folder, a bunch of files, .files, then we're going to use one file at a time. This file has a .name property, right? So we can take the name of the file and then put it into a variable called old name. And then depending on the user's option, right? So the user has 1 of 5 options. Depending on what the user has chosen, we can say, well, in case 1, we're going to replace the underscore with space. Case 2, we're going to replace the space with underscore. Case 3, well, these are new names. So the new name is new file name is we take the old file name and replace the underscore with space and so on and so forth. So you're basically constructing a new file name by manipulating the old name. Okay, so 3 is replacing the space, removing the space, also removing the underscore. Case 4 to 5 is if option is 4, then the new character is space, else if it's not, the new character is underscore. Okay, so what we're doing is we are actually taking the length. We can use len as the length of the string. And then we're searching for, in this particular string, we're trying to figure out where the dot is. That's we're looking for the file extension. Okay, so we're looking for where the period is. Okay, and then what we do is before the period to 2-step -1. So going from the position of the file name right before the period. Right, so excluding the extension and going backwards in the file name. So going from right to left. And we're going to check if we have any kind of uppercase, right? So if we find any kind of uppercase, this is how you look for uppercase. So if character is greater than capital A and character is less than capital Z, because the character is capturing a character over there, and you can actually do this comparison because the alphabet is listed from A to Z and then the lowercase a to Z. So as long as the character is between capital A and capital Z, you know that it's a capital size letter. Then what we can do is we can see if that is a space, if there's a space or an underscore, then we're going to construct the old name by doing the left, the new character, and the right name, and so on and so forth. So this is a pretty tricky way of replacing the characters, right? So you have to be able to find the uppercase character and then find the spot that's right before it and then do the replacement using the new character. So this is a pretty tricky code. You can go ahead and try to go through this one by one and make sure you understand it properly. And then once all this is done, then we assign the old name to the new name string. And then what we do is once we've done all these manipulation, then we compare if the old name and the new name is the same. If they're the same, then there's nothing to do. However, if they're different, then I'm going to assign a new name to the file objects .name property. And then I'm going to count. I have a counter to figure out how many changes are made. So every time the old name and new name is different, then I'm updating the file name. Every time I update the file name, I increment my counter by 1. So once this is all done, then what I can do is this is next, right? So this is the next of this for loop. So we'll go through every single file. So depending on how many files there are, if there are only 2 files in the folder, then you will do 2 rounds. If you have 200 files in this folder, then this for loop will run 200 times, right? So it'll just run as long as there is still a file to be processed. So depending on how many files you have, you may have lots of changes or maybe you make no changes. So what we do here is depending on how many changes we made, we can pop a message box telling the user how many changes have been made. And that's it. This is the code. And we can now perhaps go through it just to see how the variables get updated and so on. Okay, so let's go through this. This is the message box saying in the next dialog box, we're going to select file folders where files will be renamed or stored. Okay, so we are creating a new instance of the object. And then this is a true false. So we're going to see if fd.show is true or false. Okay, so we're selecting documents. We're selecting this. 2 files were, we went through the code without running through, well, we didn't get a chance to walk through the code at all. So let's try this again. I will put another stop over here. So let's do this. Okay. So we'll go through this function, we initialize, it's right here, and then we show the user interface, and then we select an option. So we'll make the user interface hide. Okay. And because I did not cancel, it goes through these options, and now we're going to rename option to 2. So now show options dialog, this name of the function is the return value, and it's a Boolean, so we're setting it to not cancel, which is true, and then we're going to unload. Okay, this is what happens when we unload. Okay, so now we're back here into our main module, And we're gonna set this folder to this get folder search folder. Now, search folder is a string variable, and it stores the folder C users chung 01 documents by documents folder. So the path has been captured as a string that I can use. Then I'm using the string variable as a parameter of this get folder method. So we can get this particular folder at this location and put it into and to create a folder object. So I'm going to view the locals window. That way we can look at our objects. Okay. So you can see that the FileDialog object has a bunch of features, properties, and so on, all these variables that we can access. We also have an FSO. So FSO is the file system object. Okay. And this file system object doesn't have a whole lot, but we do have the search folder. So this folder has an attribute. It has a name. It's called documents because I selected the documents folder, and it has a path. So the path is this full path over here. Okay, and we also have a file object that is file, but it hasn't been initiated yet because we haven't started using it. But now we have the search folder, and it has a files dot file. So let's see the search folder. Okay, so the search folder is this object over here, and it has dot files. This dot files collection. It has actually, you can see the count is 10, so there are 10 files, and each of these files is a file object. They have name, right, and they have path, they have size and other properties. This is another file. Let's take a look at this file, file number 10. So file number 10 is p1311.xlsx. So that is this one. Okay. So it basically captured all these different files from here. So not the folders, but the files. So these get put into an array over here. That is a collection. So these collection of 10 items in the dot files collection. So the dot files collection of this object called search folder. It's a folder, right? So it's search folder. Has 10 files. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through each of the files. Okay, so now we're looking at the first file. And the first file is this .git.gnor file. And we're going to assign the file name. So the file has a name. So if you look at file, you'll see that this is the file object. It has a name. It has a lot of other, it has a path. It has lots of other properties that we can access. But right now we're using name, and we're just storing the name into the string variable called old name. And then we're going to do all this replacements, okay? And then we're going to compare the new name to the old name. They're actually the same because there's no space or underscore in it. So we're not going to make any changes. And then we're going to iterate through to the next file. So the next one is this .httr-oath file. So again, we are going through the second option that there's no underscore, so I'm just going to skip. The third file is .rdata. Again, there's nothing to be replaced, so I'm just going to iterate through. The fourth one is that our history, again, probably nothing to look at. This one has a space. Okay, so let's see. The case 2 is replacing the old name. Okay, so old name is Chang space G dot XLSX, and it does have a space in it. So this might work actually. Let me see. So the old name, it has a space, but the new name has an underscore. So that we have created a new name based on the old name, and we have done the proper replacement. So this one, because the old name and the new name are different, we are actually going to go ahead and update the name. So the new name is this. We're going to assign it to the file.name property, and then we're going to increment the counter by 1. Okay, so this new name is Chang underscore G. Okay, so we have already changed the file name. So if we come here and take a look, this file name has been changed. Pretty cool, right? So that's all, and then we'll just have to run through all of them. And it says 2 files have been renamed properly, successfully. So that is probably Chang underscore G and this clock underscore X1. So these, we have 2 new underscores over here because of this routine. So that's all. Hopefully you found this demonstration to be clear and useful, and hopefully you'll be able to do all sorts of creative stuff with your file system objects. So have fun.